So if you were here for Kyle's talk this morning, a lot of these intro slides are going to be pretty familiar. If you weren't here, then I will go through them and tell you about my field. The talk today I'm going to give is about the software package that I've written called, unimaginatively again, UConnRCMPy. And what I'm trying to do is enable reproducible and repeatable data analysis for our experiment. So this ties into some of the work that Kyle was talking about as well. So as a little bit of motivation, combustion really drives our energy economy. And to put some numbers to the pie chart that Kyle showed before, this is a bar graph with data from the EIA, the federal agency, the Energy Information Administration. And the blue bars are data from 2013, and the orange bars are projections out to 2040. And the first three categories there, petroleum, natural gas, and coal, are all combustion. So you can see that that makes up that 85% number that was mentioned before. And even out to 2040, and these projections might have shifted a little bit. I think 2013 was just at the very start of the natural gas boom. So these projections might have shifted a little bit by now. But even all the way out to 2040, there's still a huge dependence on combustion as an energy conversion method. And I'd also like to point out that combustion can also be used renewably a little bit, especially if we use something like biomass to do the combustion. So then we can have a net zero gain in something like carbon dioxide over the life cycle of growing a plant, making the fuel out of it, and then burning it at the end. That said, most of what we use right now is that petroleum, natural gas, coal, and the combustion of these fossil fuels is really not very good for us, for our health, for the environment in general, and even for the economy. Wild swings in the price of oil that we saw, I think, last year really affected a lot of companies. So we have two ways to get around using these fossil fuels, or at least ameliorating some of the difficulties that we have with them. We can design better engines, and we can design better fuels. The problem is that if we want to design a good engine to use a better fuel, we need to pick that fuel. But to pick the fuel, we need to know what kind of engine we're designing for. So you can't really do that experimentally. It's a factorial problem, right? So the number of possibilities just explodes very quickly. And so the solution to this is to use a computer-aided design. And the goal with the computer-aided design is to design a fuel-flexible, high-efficiency, low emissions, those are my keywords, engines. But the key is that the models that we use have to be predictive. And so this is something that Kyle talked about a little bit, is how do we make sure that the models that we're using are accurate and predictive. One of the ways that we do that is by conducting a lot of experiments in a more fundamental sense. Whereas real engines are pretty complicated. They are affected by things like taking in gas mixtures and injecting fuel, exhausting those out, mixing the fuel and the air together in an inhomogeneous way, fluid mechanics. We often take a power output from an engine, if we're trying to do something useful with it, like drive a car. So all of that makes it really complicated to model, and you would typically need to use something like Fluent CFD or OpenFOAM CFD with millions of mesh cells, and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks to run that kind of a simulation. And so I have this graph on the right here, which is from the textbook that I teach thermodynamics from. And this graph shows the pressure on the y-axis and the volume on the x-axis. And this is supposed to be a model of how the piston moves around in your engine, say in your car or something like that. So from 1 to 2 is the compression. And in that process, the pressure and temperature of the gas in the cylinder are going up. From 2 to 3, we have ignition that's occurring. Piston's not moving during that part, ideally. 3 to 4 is when we take the power output, and 4 to 1 is when we exhaust the gases out of the cylinder. So what we want to do is take out process 3 to 4 and 4 to 1. We don't care about that. We just want to simplify this as much as we can. We want to study process 1 to 2, the compression, and 2 to 3, the ignition. And the machine that I've used to do that, there are a number of ways, there are plenty of ways that we can do that, but the machine that I've used in my research is this one called a rapid compression machine. So I got a question before about the title of my talk, if rapid compression was about data or something like that. No, it's this thing that looks kind of like an engine. This is about 8 feet long to give you a sense of scale. So if I were to lay down next to it, it'd be a little taller than me even still. And the business end of it is in the reaction chamber. And so in the reaction chamber, we fill in a pre-mixed mixture, so it's already homogeneous, of the fuel in the air. So we don't have to worry about any inhomogeneities in the gas mixture that we're studying. And we've done our best in designing this to minimize the effects of fluid mechanics. So now we don't have to try and solve the Navier-Stokes equations in addition to all the other chemistry equations that we're trying to solve as well. The best thing about this machine is that it makes it relatively simple to get to similar thermodynamic conditions in terms of pressure and temperature that are present in a real engine, that is high pressure and relatively low temperatures. And so then the hydraulic cylinder, the pneumatic chamber, and the driving air tank are just details of the experiment, basically how we control it. So a typical experiment would look something like this. On the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis is pressure. And starting from the left there, you can see that there's a piston inside the, well, let me go back. There's a piston rod over here. And this piston rod runs through the length of the machine, so that there's a piston inside the reaction chamber over here. And starting from minus 30 milliseconds there up until what we call the end of compression, the piston is moving forward and compressing the gases that are in the cylinder. That, of course, is raising the pressure and also raising the temperature. So one of our objectives in this measurement is to figure out what is the pressure at the end of compression and what is the temperature at the end of compression. Those are two of the things that we're looking for in any given RCM experiment. The other thing that we're looking for are the ignition delays. And so the ignition delay is basically defined as the time from the end of compression until we see a big spike in pressure. And I keep forgetting that I should use my mouse here. Oh, it's not going to work. Okay. This big spike in pressure here is the overall ignition delay. And that overall ignition delay is one of the parameters that we're looking for. In certain special conditions, we can have a smaller pressure rise, sort of in the middle. And we call that the first stage ignition delay. And I actually generated this figure using the package that I'm talking about. And apparently I have some bugs in it because my first stage ignition delay, tau 1, does not line up with that pressure rise, although it should. So there's work to be done. Basically what we measure from the RCM, our objective is to get to the pressure, the temperature, and the ignition delays. Those are the four things that we want. What we actually measure is a voltage output. So we have a dynamic pressure transducer on the reaction chamber that measures the change in pressure from the initial condition to whatever the final condition is, and converts it to a voltage, a 0 to 10 volt output. Nominally, the initial voltage is 0, right? We're measuring a change in pressure. So nominally, the initial voltage is 0. And we need to process this voltage somehow to compute the pressure, the temperature, and the ignition delay. So with a slightly different case here, I'll show you this is the typical voltage trace that we measure. And we can see, if I zoom in on the sort of the period around the end of compression there, where I just drawn the red box, the signal is pretty noisy, and we'd like to eliminate some of that noise because this really affects our calculation of what is the pressure at the end of compression. The other thing that we can see, if we zoom in on the time before compression starts, is that that gray line there is the 0 volt line, and we'd expect at least the mean of the voltage to be like through that gray line, but it's not. So there's some offset from our initial condition. So we need to correct for that as well. So some will call these problems, I call them engineering opportunities. Again, the signal is noisy, gives us an error in the PC. There's an offset in the initial voltage, gives us an error in the initial pressure, which leads to actually a very strong error in the computation of the temperature at the end of compression. I did a little bit of an uncertainty analysis on that, and it turns out that the thing that most strongly affects the error in temperature is the initial pressure that you use. There are also about 25 RCMs in use all over the world. And as far as I can tell, everyone uses their own way to process the data. We all have similar problems to this, obviously not all the exact same problems, but it's almost all developed by the researcher as they conduct the experiment for their own needs. And that is a problem. This article from Nature is just a headline that reproducibility is a big consensus that we're trying to reach in the scientific community these days. So what I want to do is write a data analysis framework that I can use that anyone operating RCMs can use. And I want to write in Python because I like Python. I started in MATLAB, and I wanted to distribute my code, and I realized that everyone would need licenses for MATLAB, and so I converted everything to Python. I want to enable reproducible analysis across researchers. I want to document all my design choices for how I filter the data and correct for any errors that are present. And I also want to have a citable open source publication of the code. And so my solution to that was to write my package, UConnRCMPy. UConn is the abbreviation for the University of Connecticut. RCM is my experiment, and Pi because every Python package has pi in it. And the code is all available on GitHub. You can see the link there, and you can check it out if you want. So the main features of UConnRCMPy, I tried to make it as best I could a soup to nuts, a beginning to end data processing framework for this RCM data. So we take in the raw voltage that gets generated from the experiment. We record that into a text file. That's done in LabVIEW. So we take that text file with the raw voltage data, we filter it and smooth it. Then we convert that into a pressure trace, process that pressure trace to find the pressure at the end of compression, the temperature at the end of compression, and the 2 ignition delays, in some cases 2 ignition delays. So I just want to right now briefly go through some of the design decisions that I made in designing this. If I have some time at the end, go through a demo, and then also tell you about the future work that I'm looking at to improve this software. So the first thing is when we take in the raw voltage trace, we need to filter it and smooth it somehow. So this is a plot. On the y-axis is the power spectral density, and on the x-axis is the frequency. And you can see that there's a few peaks in the noise, primarily above 10 kilohertz. And so the first thing that I did was to apply a filter, a low-pass filter with a cutoff frequency of 10 kilohertz. And that really helped my signal, really helped improve the quality of the signal, at least not necessarily objectively, at least qualitatively. There we go. And after that, I also smoothed the signal using a moving average algorithm with a particular window width. These are typical values that I've seen for the experiments that I've done. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will apply to every experiment, and that's actually one of the improvements that I'd like to make is how do I better pick a cutoff frequency and a window width for the filtering and smoothing. In any case, if I plot the red line, which is the filtered and smooth signal, overlaid on the blue line, which is the raw voltage trace, you can see, at least qualitatively, we haven't done anything bad to the data. You know, we haven't shifted that big peak in the voltage by a whole lot and messed up our data. So, you know, we're doing pretty good with that. And if I zoom in again on this region around the end of compression, you can see that the red line, which is the smooth data, filtered and smooth data, and the blue line, which is the original raw data, that I'm doing a lot better at getting rid of some of that noise. So after I filter and smooth the data, I need to correct the offset that I found in the voltage. So in this plot, the blue is the original raw signal, and now the orange is the filtered and smooth signal. And the way that I corrected for the offset is just to subtract the initial voltage. Take the voltage at the very first data point and subtract it out. And that gives me, you can see in the green line, a line that's at least approximately centered around the voltage of 0, nominal voltage of 0 volts. So that's a good start as well. After I correct the offset, I need to turn this voltage trace into a pressure trace. And from the pressure trace, I need to calculate the ignition delays. So ignore the figure for a second. The pressure, which is shown in blue in the figure, okay, never mind, don't ignore the figure. The pressure, which is shown in blue, is equal to the voltage, the filtered and smoothed and offset corrected voltage, times some factor that is set from the experiment, added to the initial pressure. Because, again, that dynamic pressure transducer that produces the voltage is measuring a change in pressure. So we need to add on the initial pressure. So that's the blue line in the figure there. The orange line is the time derivative of the pressure. So we use, I think I have a second order central difference of the pressure trace there because it is sampled at a rate of 100 kilohertz. And I compute the derivative. And then based on the peaks in the derivative, I'm able to compute my ignition delays. So the overall ignition delay is the global maximum of the derivative, and the first stage ignition delay is the any maxima in the derivative between the end of compression and the overall ignition. So you can see that here as here's the orange line, which is the derivative. Here's the global maximum going up here as the pressure spikes from ignition there. And then here I have a small peak in the time derivative in between the end of compression and the overall ignition. This is probably the hardest thing that I have to do with this software because the signal is still noisy, even though I've filtered and smoothed it. There's still some noise in the signal. And taking the derivative of that signal increases the noise in the derivative. So it's difficult for me to pick out peaks in the derivative signal in between the two bigger peaks. And so that's what I mentioned, the bug that I had on my first pressure trace plot. In this one, it's been corrected, and it seems to be working properly. Finally, the last bit that we have to do, we're still missing the temperature. We need to compute the temperature at the end of compression. And to compute the temperature at the end of compression, we need to model some of the facility effects that are happening. So you can see as the compression happens, the pressure is increasing. After the end of compression, the pressure decreases slightly. In reality, that turns out to be due to heat transfer from the reactants into the reactor walls. But we actually model the whole process as adiabatic and actually undergoing an adiabatic volume compression and then an adiabatic volume expansion to model the whole process. And that turns out to give us pretty good results after we solve the first law of thermodynamics here, the law of conservation of energy. Then we can calculate the temperature at the end of compression, and we're within about 5 Kelvin of some experimental measurements. 5 out of 700 to 1,000 Kelvin. So we're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good at estimating the temperature this way. And of course, there's some uncertainty on the experimental measurements as well. So UConnRCMPy handles, through its various classes and methods, all of these functions: the filtering and smoothing, the offset correction, calculation of pressure trace, derivative, ignition delay, and also the calculation of the temperature at the end of compression. And so the way that I've put this together is I've tried to make it as modular as possible because every experimentalist that I know has their own data format that they prefer. They want to store their data in tab-separated text files, or maybe some prefer comma-separated text files. Or some prefer HDF5, and some prefer some other format. So I tried to make this as modular as possible so that other experimenters can go in and replace the parts that they don't need with what they actually are planning to use. And so the main user interface to UConnRCMPy is shown in the orange box here in the middle. Whoops, go back. And all the inputs the user is required is in the gray box on the left side. Internal classes that the user might need to replace are in the white box. And then the outputs that I want, the experimental ignition delay, the pressure at the end of compression, the some file outputs, and then finally the temperature at the end of compression are there. So of course, this presentation would not be complete without shouting out all the people that I use, all their software that I use. An interesting fact, so I use SciPy for my filtering, and it turns out that the FFT convolve method from SciPy was about 100 times faster than the NumPy convolve method. So I thought that was kind of interesting. For my data sets, I'm not saying this is generalizable, but I thought that was kind of interesting. I am using Cantera as well to manage all of the thermodynamic information about the reactor. All my plots are generated by Matplotlib, and I do have documentation available on the web, which is generated by Sphinx. I've done the best that I can to document all my classes and functions so that if people need to try and replace them, they can figure out what the outputs from those need to be. So I think I'll have some time now. I can go through a very quick demo. This software is really designed to be used in a very interactive manner. And the user is going to be running an experiment and then processing their data and going back and forth from the experimental machine into their computer. And so my preferred way of using this software is in a Jupyter notebook. You can also use something like Spider, which is the IDE that looks like MATLAB. Again, I prefer the Jupyter notebook. So on this slide, I'm basically showing you that I'm importing everything that I need, but also that I have these data files in this folder that have this format for their name. And when I process all the data, I end up with one figure for every experiment that has the pressure and the derivative on it, so I can go and look at my data. And I end up with one figure where I compare all of the pressure traces from a given experiment. So this lets me work with and look at my data as I'm processing it, as I'm collecting it, and make sure that nothing is going wrong with the experiment, and make sure that I'm at the correct conditions that I expect to be at. I also copy the data into a spreadsheet. I have an automatically outputs the data onto the clipboard, and I copy it into a spreadsheet, again, so I can interact with it in real time and figure out what's going on in the experiment. To compute the temperature at the end of compression and run a simulation, I need to do a few other things. I need to run the experiment that tells me about how the machine is operating, the machine-specific effects. And then I need to dump all of that into a YAML file, all the information about the experiment. And then I can run a simulation. And so in the plot over here, in blue is the actual experimental pressure. In red is a simulation where I include the reactions, where I allow reactivity to happen in the simulation. And in green is if I turn all the reactions off. And you can see that during the compression stroke, all three of these agree really well. And so I know that the temperature that I take from the simulation, which is how I get at the value of the temperature at the end of compression, that the pressure traces agree really well. And so the temperature will tend to agree very well also. In terms of future work for this, I mentioned I'd like to have automatic calculation of an optimal or several optimal low-pass filter cutoff frequencies, and also the moving average window width. That has all been done empirically by me and determined by comparison to my data. I'd also like to have some improved detection of the end of compression. We can introduce a little bit of uncertainty into the ignition delay times if we set the end of compression to be in not quite the right spot. So I'd like to improve my detection of that as well. At the moment, I don't have any unit tests written for this because I'm a mechanical engineer and I was never trained in software engineering or anything like that. So that's on my to-do list. And then there's a couple other issues with the code that you can see on the issues page on GitHub. So with that, I'll close up and acknowledge our sponsor, the National Science Foundation. I'd like to thank all the reviewers of my paper for the SciPy proceedings, my collaborators in the lab, and you can find my contact information there. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll be happy to take any questions now.
I'll ask some questions.
Yes.
Signal processing.
Yes, perfect. I want to talk to someone like you.
Why are you sampling at 100 kilohertz?
Because we can. There's no particular reason for the choice of that. The timescales that you can see there are in the order of a couple of milliseconds, so we really want to make sure that we have enough data points that we can get a little bit of precision in terms of computing the ignition delay and something like the end of compression or something like that.
But when you sample at the higher rate, you capture a lot of things that are kind of extraneous. So
Yeah.
Then you go filter them away. It's like, okay, what did I need that for? But you have interpolated more points as a result of that.
Okay.
So have you ever heard of this Stavitsky-Golay interpolator?
Yes. I tried using that and I could not make it work. I don't know why.
Because it gives you derivatives nicely and it smooths out things too. I use that in some orbital mechanics stuff.
Okay.
Really well.
Okay.
But it requires careful tuning, I think.
Yeah.
So you've already seen it. That could be useful for your group.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. I'll go back and look at that because I think when I looked at that, I was a young PhD student, and so I didn't have,
It was not developed by an electrical engineering signal processor type. I think it was actually a chemical engineering person who came up with that, I think.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you use it, you're actually honoring it.
Yeah, continuing the tradition. That'd be awesome. Yeah, thank you.
That's all.
That's all. Okay.
Other questions?
Impulse on the computation of the derivative.
Okay.
You said this amplifies the noise.
Yes.
So how are you actually computing
I don't remember exactly. It's a numerical differentiation scheme. I think it's second order forward differencing.
Because I thought typically you get like huge amplification of noise if you just do it in the naive way.
Yeah.
But I see your data, it looks nice.
It's still pretty noisy, especially in the derivative. That case was a relatively strong second stage ignition. There are times when it's even weaker than that, where you can see the pressure rise happening, but you don't see anything in the derivative because it's just washed out by the noise. So that's one of the improvements that I really want to make is working on our detection of that.
There's a good explanation for that from signal processing too.
Yeah.
You're multiplying by 1/f in the frequency spectra, so.
Right.
You get, or you're multiplying by half, so you're accentuating all of the high frequency noise with differentiating. That's
Right.
just, it's there.
It's just built in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you know of ways that I could improve that process, or?
Be band limited before you take the derivative if you're worried about accentuating noise that you don't
Okay.
want to accentuate, because that'll go away.
Okay.
I mean, it's not perfect though, because it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's gonna be
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have
Yeah.
I think a simple one. You said that you took away your initial voltage that you measured.
Right.
Was that just for the first sample you measured, or did you do that over the long period of that, I guess,
Before the
initial
experiment.
state,
Yeah.
before it actually scooped up into the?
So I take the initial voltage, like the very first point.
Okay.
If the noise is bouncing around randomly around some mean, then it shouldn't really matter which point I take. And I do take kind of the average. Okay, I misspoke. What I do is I take the average of the first few points.
Okay.
And
So I was gonna say otherwise there could be some transient
yeah,
jumps in even the first initial sample.
yeah,
I figured your initial, it's modeling a system that just starts up. I'm
yeah,
not really sure about that part, but
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Thank you.
Cool.
So when you're calculating the ending compression properties,
Yeah.
like temperature, for example,
Sure.
that's the one you should plot, right? So,
Yep.
that you showed that like using non-reactive versus reactive, pretty much gives you the same answer.
Yes.
But that's all using one particular models.
Yes.
So that requires you to like pick something to use. Now,
Yes. That's correct.
I think that the thermodynamic properties are going to be fairly consistent. Between
Should be for stable species. Yeah.
Yes, so for those species, I guess for the big ones like the reactants.
Yeah.
Are you essentially going to get the exact same answer from a compression regardless of what you use?
There's some variation. My experience has been plus minus 1 or 2 Kelvin,
Okay. So
something like that. So it's pretty small, and it's due to the thermodynamic changes. But for stable species, it should be
yeah.
pretty consistent. Yeah.